You don't pull the parachute when you're still up on the cliff. You don't wait till you get to the bottom and then pull it because you've got no arm left. So it's this idea of it's better to launch whatever you're doing in a sloppy way that's going to stumble and maybe, have a few broken parts along the way than it is to wait forever and never actually do it.
Welcome to the Vision Hunters Podcast. I'm your host, Cody Storey, and my guest for today's show is my brother, Luke Storey. Luke is a motivational speaker, meditation and metaphysics teacher, and lifestyle design expert who shares transformative principles of health and spirituality. He's host of the top-rated, the Life Stylist Podcast, and founder of School of Style, the world's premier online fashion school for stylists. Luke has spent the past 2 decades refining the ultimate wellness lifestyle. His teachings combine primal health and ancient spiritual practices with the most cutting-edge natural healing and consciousness-expanding technologies. Real quick, before we dive in, I want to give you this heads up. This is a 2-part interview, so this is part 1 of 2. If you like this episode, be sure to check out the next one because we did a deep dive for 2 hours into some amazing topics about hitting rock bottom and transcending the pit of despair, drug addiction, and living the rock and roll lifestyle, how Luke had a spiritual experience that has changed him and his life forever, the nature of expansion, reframing fear, the success-failure equation, finding fulfillment, entrepreneurship, and so much more. So I would also like to just say real quick, if you enjoy this show and you enjoy the Vision Hunters Podcast and you enjoy these episodes that I'm going to be releasing every week at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, please remember to hit subscribe, like, and leave a review. That would be greatly appreciated. Now let's get into the very first episode with my brother, Luke Storey. Welcome to the show, Luke. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, well, I'm returning the favor. You've been on my podcast, so now, now I get to be a guest for you.
I really appreciate it, and I'm really grateful. You've been a role model in my life for a very long time. It's really special to me to be able to step into this new arena and do this, which is my very first podcast, and have you as my very first guest. So I really appreciate that, and all the time you've already spent with me in the past couple of days. And we just made a video on how to get started with podcasting, and being able to watch some of it, it's phenomenal. And you have a lot to offer and a lot to give, and that's my hope for today, is to, just like any other guest, create a platform for people to share their gifts, share their talents, their expertise, and to share their message and their story. I'd like to start with the first question on my list. Before we get into how you built the Life Stylist Podcast, which has had millions of downloads, and how you've gone from celebrity stylist to spiritual guide, I'd like to start by asking you, what's been one of your biggest wake-up calls or one of your biggest spiritual awakenings in regards to your personal life, where you overcame a major challenge or a so-called failure?
Well, the first and biggest one was when I was 26 years old. I had been living in Hollywood, which is where we are still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
30 years or 31 years, I think, for me now. But at 19, I moved to Hollywood, and I was already well on my way to being a card-carrying drug addict and alcoholic, and that ran its course through playing in bands and just living in the underbelly of Hollywood in those first few years in the early 90s. And Hollywood back then was a much grittier place. I mean, I think someone from the Midwest might come here and find it gritty still. Mm-hmm. Someone from a more wholesome culture in a smaller city. I'm sure there's a lot of shenanigans going on here that I'm just not aware of because I'm in a different plane of reality than that. But, I moved here, and it was the first time I was away from my parents and any form of authority. And one of the reasons I was thinking about this, because I'm working on a book, and I was working with my writing coach, and she said, well, we need to know why. There's a whole kind of period of moving to Hollywood and all the things that ensued. And she said, well, why did you move there? And I thought, basically just so I could do drugs in an unbridled way. I didn't want to have to answer to anyone, because I found parents to be kind of an impedance on my
Absolutely.
partying, and I didn't want to have anyone tell me what to do. And so, there was a lot of fun times during that period, but it got progressively dark as the active addiction just really progressed in my life. And you saw it firsthand. And for those listening, it just got to be a really shameful place of just feeling so entrapped and just in such bondage. The way that I remember that experience, aside from those couple of years where it was still fun here and there, and I was young and in Hollywood and playing in bands, and there was a lot of fun times too at first, but when the hard drugs really kind of kicked in a meaningful way, I really felt like a slave. I just felt totally imprisoned, and there was no escape and no way out. And so my secondary reason for moving to Hollywood was I wanted to be around musicians, and I didn't know at the time, because of my lack of self-worth, that I could be one also. So I basically just started hanging around musicians kind of as a fan slash groupie slash drug dealer, and selling them drugs, these older guys that I'd idolized in high school and stuff that I ended up meeting. When I moved here, that was kind of my way in. I was this young kid, and in order for people to like me, I would always have drugs and things like that. But I didn't know that I didn't know how easy it was to play music, basically. Not that I did it that well, but I had a friend that was older than me that was one of my musical idols, and he taught me how to play bass. And we picked that just because it's only 4 strings, and it's the instrument you could probably get into a band fastest with. Like, you can be like an okay bass player and get in an okay band, whereas you can't be a really shitty singer or a drummer or guitar player and move up that quickly. So I started playing music, and I really wanted to make it. I had this fantasy that if I could succeed as a musician and be a rock star, or even semi-rock star, that I wouldn't have to have a job that I hated, because I had no education, no skills. I had a lot of learning disabilities and things like that, and just behavioral problems as a kid. So I felt really stupid, and I wasn't interested in anything else except drugs and music in that order. And so I got in a band, and I was kind of the band, I was always the band manager, the guy organizing photo shoots and booking gigs, and I just had that leadership quality in making sure that we got out there. And I made the flyers, and I was always the guy that did all that stuff. And I think that is probably the value I brought to my musical endeavors, more so than having an innate musical ability. But I had enough older guys around me that were really great musicians that taught me the fundamentals. And then I had this vision that I could get back then the way it worked is you get a big record deal and you get an advance, and then you guys all move in a house together in Silver Lake and do drugs and write your first record, record it, go on tour, be on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. And the music industry was different then. You could get a big advance. Bands like Guns N' Roses had just broke in, and I didn't really play music exactly like that, but I was kind of involved in that scene in Hollywood, those people around that band and stuff like that. So that was the big dream. So I'd be crippled by low self-worth and self-doubt, and I just felt like I wasn't good enough in so many ways as a person, but especially a musician. But I was around a lot of good musicians and kind of, finagled my way in there, and that was the first thing I ever tried to really succeed at, because it was the only thing I cared about. So, I really wanted to get a record deal, and, we got a little record deal for a minute. We put out a little EP, and the semi-legit label, and we had some great opportunities, but everyone in the band had a lot of drug problems, and we were just really, really dysfunctional, all traumatized kids that grew up and, got into the lifestyle we did to medicate that trauma. I mean, that's my opinion of it. They might have a different perception, but that's kind of the way I see it, just psychologically. So anyway, I worked for those first few years in Hollywood trying to make it as a musician, and just one failure after another. A great opportunity comes, we fuck it up every time. I remember one time we were playing a gig in Hollywood on Cherokee and Hollywood Boulevard. Oh man, what was that club called? Bar Deluxe, it was called. And this guy came up to me. As I said, I was kind of the spokesman for the band. I wasn't the musical leader. My friend Ronnie, who who was one of the guy that taught me how to play bass, he was the musical leader for sure. But I was kind of the spokesman, and got people's business cards and stuff. And anyway, I'm making a short story really long, but it does get to a point of that starting over and that failure, because the failure was really twofold. When I get to it, it's as a musician, as my first dream, and also just failure as a human being, that led to some great success later. But anyway, we played a gig one night at Bar Deluxe, and we had a pretty good little local following. We would kind of tour around LA basically and play all of the hottest clubs, and we got a following, and we could bring some people in. We get a couple bucks. If not, we get free beer, which was like even better than a couple bucks for me. But one night, this older guy comes up to me and he says, "Man, you guys really have something special here. I'm going to give you my card. Contact me. We'll cut some demos. I really think I can help you guys get a deal." And I was like, "Oh, cool. Well, who are you?" And he said, "Oh, my name's Tim Palmer. I produce David Bowie, blah, blah."
Wow.
Real deal, producer.
Yeah.
He said, "Man, call me." And I was like, "Yes, sir. I'm going to call you." Got home, smoked a bunch of crack,
Wow. Damn.
and who knows what else. And then that card just went wherever it went. And that was,
Damn.
there was a lot of situations like that where we were really close, and I just probably self-sabotaged a lot too. I would do that. It's kind of one of the hallmarks of addiction is on some level, since an addict, when they're really caught in the cycle of that, is living under such shame and self-degradation that when an opportunity to break out of that life comes, it's like you have the tendency to really go nuts at that time. It's like even in recovery programs, they talk about how when things are going really well, you'll drink and use to celebrate, right? And then when things are going wrong, you drink and use to escape your misery. And that would have been one of those. It's like, "Yeah, man, we're gonna get a deal. Tim Palmer, man, we go party." And then that was the self-sabotage of that opportunity. So it all came to kind of a screeching halt when I was 26, and I just got to a place where I wasn't getting any relief from the medication I was administering to myself for my childhood trauma and all of the compounding shame that I experienced as an addict. And so I checked myself into treatment with the help of my mom. Thank God. I always have to thank her, because I don't know that I would have even been capable of, organizing that transition and getting myself somewhere. I mean, I couldn't get to the bathroom barely, so it was getting on a plane and things like that were pretty much impossible. But I did manage to get into a treatment center, and that was really, the ultimate demise of my life up until that point. It was just, I was an absolute failure at everything I tried to do, to the point where I couldn't have any kind of job or employment, and even the vocation that I took up as a result of becoming unemployed on the up and up legally was dealing drugs, and toward the end I couldn't even do that. I couldn't even keep up with the with the schedule of clients, and we had answer machines back then, and I just couldn't even get to the messages to make money to do the thing. And more than on the outside failure and the demise of my musical career, or at least the aspirations of it and all of that, was just really the inside of just feeling like my life was over, and that there was just no hope for me of ever being anyone important or achieving any level of success. And in that experience came, thankfully, some degree of humility and willingness to change and to seek help and actually listen to someone else. Because my whole life, I had never listened to anyone about anything, with the exception of one dean at boarding school, this man, Tim Brace, that really saved my life when I was 14. I got sent away because I was having a lot of problems with police. And that was the one adult that I learned to trust. I got sober for 2 years when I was 14, because I was already, before that, well on my way and deep into all the stuff. And aside from that, I'd never trusted anyone, never listened to anyone, no authorities, no teachers, no police, no counselors, therapists, parents. It's just, I was so egoic. I wasn't going to be told what to do. I was so prideful and arrogant and self-righteous, and also just so inherently negative about everything, So anyway, I went into the rehab and I listened to their aspect because I was desperate, and it was in there that I had a spiritual experience. The first day I came to, it's one of my favorite stories, and it almost always makes me cry. Maybe not almost, maybe every time. The amount of gratitude I have for that experience is just, it's so deep, it's so profound. And, here I am 23 years later, and a grown-ass man. I mean, I guess I'm middle-aged. You know, I don't feel like it. I'm almost 50 years old, and it's like I can go back to that morning and the access, the miracle that transpired in my life, just because of that key ingredient of humility, just that one thing of just admitting to myself that I was broken and that I, in and of myself, didn't have the power to put myself back together. And that the number one most important thing in my life was not girls liking me or making money or being a rock star or being popular or any of those external validation values that I held on to. I really surrendered all of those, and I surrendered my arrogance and my my stupidity, you know, the stupidity of the way that I lived my life. It's just one bad decision after another. And the only really smart decision I made was checking myself into that treatment center. And on that first morning, it wasn't like a spiritual experience in the sense that while it was happening, I was aware that something very otherworldly was taking place. It was in the subsequent days, for the next 28 days, and then in the few months after that, that I was, you know, released from the treatment center, that I had realized what happened for me. And I realized that the moment that I started really praying in earnest, I mean, in a very, you know, I mean, I wasn't praying to Jesus or something, but it was praying in a very traditional religious sense. I mean, like on my hands and knees, hands in prayer position. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, you know, I didn't grow up with any kind of religion or church or any experience with that, but I was just desperate enough to try that, and I did. I really prayed. I remember praying to God. I think my prayer was just, I just want to be sober. Just help me. I'm stuck. I can't help myself. Just like the prayer really was, I think more specifically, take away the constant craving I have for drugs and alcohol, because it was just 24/7. I mean, there was no break ever from 16 years old to 26. You know, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I would use just because like a few hours had gone by. You know, and so my whole life was just so controlled by that my prayer was just release me from whatever this is that has me. I want to be free. And I was. In that moment, up until this very moment, I've never, I mean, there was a lot of work I had to do in recovery after that to maintain that and really cement that into my being. It's not like I just left and started hanging around the bar again and hanging around crack corner and like stayed sober. I mean, I really changed my entire life. I let go of all my old friends. I gave up my apartment. I voluntarily became homeless just to go live with sober people around town in their garage and all kinds of sordid places. And I really committed myself to recovery, but it was that initial realization that something had done something for me that there's no way I could have done on my own. And to the most ardent skeptic or atheist or even agnostic that might think, well, maybe you just got some willpower. No, I had already tried willpower for like 4 or 5 years. I tried to curtail my behavior and my addictions and control it in every way imaginable. And in that moment, that first day with those very earnest, heartfelt, humble, sincere prayers, that thing was just banished from my life. And it just never came back. I've never, ever had a craving for drugs or alcohol or thought that maybe now I could get away with it. It's been 5 years or it's been 10 years or 18 years or 20 years. It's just that door just slammed shut, or was slammed shut for me because I was willing to allow it to slam shut, and I was set free. And so in that, you know, the irony, I guess, is that that moment of abject failure and desperation, in fact, was the biggest win of my whole life. And that was a win of surrendering my life to a higher power. And that is still the higher power that I'm in the room with right now, having this conversation, that I'm surrendering my life to right now. And right now, and right now, and right now, and right now. Not all the time, perfectly, obviously. You know, I still have a will and desires and wants and make mistakes and have other tons of other addictions that have come up that I've had to surrender to in the same way. But the fundamental realization that something really profound happened to me, and really valuing that and recognizing that and giving that credit and honoring that, has created a foundation for my life that has enabled me to get through so many other rough spots in the 23 years that I've been on the path. You know, there was proof there was proof that there's something there. I still don't know what it is. I don't know how it works. I don't know where it is, if it's a he, a she, a it, in the clouds, in the universe, in the cosmos, down under the ground, in my cells. I think it's just everything and everywhere is kind of my understanding of it now, my experience of it. But that was really the main turning point in my life. And then there's been many others, of course, that you've been privy to that are all seated in that same formula, hitting up against a stuck spot and going, God damn it, I've thought about this, I've done everything I can to exert my own will over this stuck place, and I can't fix it. And therein, I experience yet another degree of surrender where I'm able to apply that same formula of going, okay, I'm trying to use my human will here, and there's a greater will, love, and intelligence that's endlessly abundant and infinite, that's there at my disposal the moment I'm willing to access it and allow it to enter into my life and to help me. And so that was the greatest failure and the greatest success all in one day. February 15th, 1997.
So what is your perception as far as the word itself, failure? How do you view even that word, or what does it mean to you today? Because at that time, just like very similar in my life, when I hit rock bottom, at that time it was perceived a failure. There was a lot of pain, there was a lot of hardship, it was a struggle at certain times, so it was perceived as a failure. I'd like to hear you maybe expand on that word itself and what that really means to you today.
Damn, that's a really good question. Wow, that's a deep one I've never thought about.
Because I look at it like a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the truest sense, there is no reality in the concept of failure, because the purpose of incarnation in human life is to learn. And so let's take a toddler and put him on the rug in here and try to get him to walk, 2-year-old or however toddlers are when they start to be able to take their first steps. Every time that toddler falls, we don't consider it, what a loser. He failed again. When's he going to get it right? It's every attempt at that toddler to walk that is unsuccessful because it's not operating on 2 legs is a success in getting closer to being able to walk. And so I look at my life as a failure up until that point, and that's my subjective experience at the time because I didn't have the universal understanding, the fundamental understanding that the purpose of this whole thing is to have experience in which you're given opportunities to learn and to evolve. So looking at my life right now, if I would say what would I view as a failure, it would be living by or demonstrating or acting out untruth and falsehood and never taking the time to recognize where the lesson was and to not seize that lesson and integrate it to prevent that pattern from continuing on. Even though I don't even think that's a failure because it's still part of the process, right? It just might take someone a few lifetimes. I mean, I'm firmly rooted in I don't even want to call it a belief, it's just an awareness that this is not my first rodeo, and this is abundantly clear to me, especially going back to kids. Sometimes when I meet, there's one kid, our friend Zen and Bunny, their kid Alchemy. I mean, I don't even want to call her a kid because she just is not a kid. She's 8 years old, but you sit down with her and you're like, your ass has been here a lot of times. There's just a knowingness to that being, So how many times has that kid failed, quote end quotes, in order to get here? So there is ultimately no failure, but I do think that you can waste time in an incarnation through ignorance, laziness, ego identification, to where when you fall, like that toddler, you don't learn the misstep that you took that prevented you from learning how to walk. And our walk as a species is walking back to universal consciousness and to God. And we're all helping each other find our way there on a good day. And anything that I do that is less than optimal is an opportunity to learn the wrong way so that I have the opportunity to go the right way. So it's all about getting out of the falsehoods and untruth and getting into universal truth, universal laws, fundamental principles of how you do anything in this body, in this life. And so there's really no failure, but there are mistakes and there's missed opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm asking because that word failure to me is something that I've wrestled with quite a bit, as far as like judgment and condemning myself, and kind of goes along the lines with the self-sabotage and everything, or, you know, being stuck in the fear of failure and having great ideas, but talking myself out of those great ideas just as quick as I talk myself into them, and then feeling like a slave to my own mind and being stuck and trapped in a prison. So I find it to just be a very interesting word that's thrown around quite a bit, but if I look at it, to me, it's just a word, and it's like, okay, it's a word, but I like to look at what's going on behind it and hear other people's interpretations of it and their experience with that word. I'm not a big fan of the word per se. I don't even know where it came from.
I think the word is rooted in the physical material world,
okay.
and that it has reality there. Okay, so if I have this potted plant here, and the pot wasn't made with an understanding of the fundamental physics in keeping dirt and water and plant matter inside said pot, and that pot cracks open because it wasn't sealed right, then that pot failed. But that pot isn't an intelligent being that has the opportunity to transmute that failure into something bigger and greater. So there are things that fail. I mean, if a bridge falls down, the bridge was a failure. It fell down. There's nothing to learn because it's a physical object, not a sentient, intelligent, spiritual being like we are. So I don't think the word itself really has any validity. And I think when we get into, and this, I'll speak for myself, when I get into the fear of failure, it's coming from a place of shame. You know, it's coming from those wounds. It's coming from being a kid and being told by the people that are meant to be there to uplift you, to tell you, oh, you fell down again trying to walk? Good job. You got one step closer to learning. If we didn't have that kind of support, if the environment in which we were raised was, you dumbass, why'd you do that? Well, that gets imprinted, and everything we do, especially in the first 7 years, gets imprinted in the subconscious mind. It really 1 through 12, but especially the first 6, 7 years. So any messages we get from our environment and the people around us become our reality, because that becomes the information in our subconscious programmable theta brainwave state that ends up becoming our personality and our way of interacting with the world. So if you are one of those people that didn't get that kind of support because that was your karmic lesson to not get it and be able to have the experience of failure subjectively, that then instigates you to look for something deeper within yourself, then you find the root of that being shame and not having a sense of self and a sense of self-worth that is forgiving to oneself, compassionate to oneself, loving to oneself, that prevents that fear of failure, because you know you can't fail. You know that you're going to try something, and if it doesn't work out according to your expectations or the expectations of others, and you don't get the desired end result that you perceived would be satisfactory to you, then you're able to contextualize that going the way it did as an opportunity to do it a different way. You know what I mean? But that's impossible if you still feel in your subconscious, back there behind the curtain, are voices saying, you're worthless. No one's going to ever love you. You're not lovable. You think you can make money? Psh, you can't make money. That's for smart people. You know, all of that shit. Yeah. That so many, I mean, most humans, I'm sure, deal with that to, some degree at some point. So all of these things that block us, and I still experience this shit all the time. I want to, right now I'm working on a book, and there's always things that I'm expanding into that are really uncomfortable. Yeah. As you said earlier, doing shit you're afraid of.
Shit,
yeah, do scary shit. I mean, I don't even want to think of anything in my life as scary, so I wouldn't frame it that way. I would say expand. And the nature of expansion is that it causes discomfort, because as you grow, you outgrow your environment. Just like if you eat a bunch of donuts and ice cream 24/7, you expand out of your current wardrobe, and that becomes uncomfortable. You got tight pants now. You know, so if we were expanding in this room, and our energy field, our auric field, who we are becomes bigger and bigger, and we imagine greater possibilities of that expansion, eventually this room's going to be really tight and small, and you need bigger. And that's why we strive for a better car and a bigger home and more career success. It's just in the nature of us to continue to grow and expand. It's in the nature of everything in nature to expand. But what we're up against is the psyche and the psychological wounds, the emotional wounds that give us false information about who we are and how we perceive our experience in life. So the only thing we're really responsible for is changing how we perceive life, so that we're the toddler that just got one step closer to learning how to walk. I start a business. I open up the brick and mortar. Okay, this is it. I got my marketing down. I got my sales team. I got, my cashier. I've got a bookkeeper. I've got all the shit. I've got a great offering, and I do it for a while, and it's not what I expected, or I go under, or people say, wow, it looks like this is failing. According to your CPA, you're failing on paper. You can't pay your staff, etc. It's information that I can use to go expand in another way. But I have to first root out that underlying framework, that scaffolding that has me interacting in the world from a place of shame and from a place of being less worthy, less capable, less intelligent than anyone else. And that's the trap of not only the initial childhood trauma, but it's the egoic framework that many of us operate from, where there's always a state of comparison going on, because any biological system has to scan its environment to find its place, to find its safe place. So the psyche, the ego, all of these different aspects of our personalities that we take on, we incarnate, they're really just doing their job of walking in a room and going, all right, everyone has expensive suits on and I'm in my gym clothes. Okay, I'm a loser. Or walking in the room in my expensive suit going, what, these guys shop at Walmart? Really? Wow. It's the same game. It's the game of comparison. It's the game of finding security and finding your position in the pack, right? In the pack of humanity at large, or your micro pack of the people that you work with at the office, or the people that work out at your gym that are so much more in shape than you, or you've really committed and you're more in shape with them, all that shit, all the comparison, all procrastination, all perfectionism, it's all coming from a misidentity of who I am, fundamentally. That's and good. Operating from a false self that's actually not me. So the game is dismantling the false self while still recognizing that it's always going to be at play to some degree. It's a matter of how much do I identify with false self versus self with the capital S, true self, higher self, the soul that isn't even a Luke Storey or a Cody Storey, the soul that's one point of focus of universal consciousness. And that sounds really spacey perhaps to some, but it's like, if you look at redwoods or you look at aspen trees, you see individual trees, but in fact it's just a biomass of one tree, right? And that's how consciousness, one living organism, and there's a million examples of that in nature. But aspen trees are a really good one, because you just see millions of aspen trees covering a mountain range, right? You think, wow, that's a bunch of trees. No, that's one tree. Just like us three in this room right now are one person, or one energy field, or one consciousness that's just individual points. And it's when we get too caught up in the survival mechanism of thinking of ourselves as separate and single that those concepts and frameworks of failure, not failure, success, not success, start to become meaningful. But stepping outside of that and get in touch with who we really are is where the self-love comes from. That's the self-respect. That's the self-compassion. That's the self-confidence of like, you know what? Even if I do this shit wrong, I'm doing it. Just like you're doing, starting your podcast. It's like,
that's what's going on here today.
But taking, you got to take failure out of the equation, because there is no failure. So say like right now you do your podcast, and this one comes out, and subsequent episodes to follow come out, and let's just say I'm just going to superimpose your goal. You want to get sponsors so you can start to monetize it, to at least pay your expenses at first, which, as I told you the other day, would be a good first goal. Then you want to get it where it buys your groceries or pays your gas bill. And, eventually you want to get it to where you have a good listenership and some affiliates and, some great sponsors, and perhaps pays all your bills, and maybe even, set a little aside for the future. And now you've made a career out of being a podcaster. So if you do this, and that path that you think from your vantage point is going to be what helps you to be engaged in your life and feel successful and feel a sense of security and a sense of purpose and all those things that you want out of that, if that doesn't manifest, then, and it falls flat, so to speak, that's not an indication that you've failed. It's that you've succeeded in finding the thing that you don't want to do. And then it was another thing. You become a fucking basketball coach at the high school or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, you just don't know.
Finding your calling.
You just don't know. Yeah, it's your dharma, and you have to go through sometimes, I believe, lifetimes and lifetimes of kind of misled dharma, because your path has been chosen by the intellect, or it's been chosen by someone that's not even you. It could be your parents. It could be society in general. I mean, depending on your cultural upbringing. If you're from India, and I'm going to generalize here based on the Indian friends I have, in a very traditional Indian family, if you don't go to college and become a doctor or a lawyer or something of that equivalent, like, you ain't making the cut. Oh, I'm going to go be a painter. What? And so there are a lot of influences that get imprinted into our consciousness that dictate to us who and what we're supposed to be, and by what metric we measure success or failure. So the success failure equation can only be solved by my getting into identification with who I really am. I'm not a podcaster. I'm not a fashion stylist. I'm not a musician. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not any of those things that I've called myself at various times. I truly am a spiritual being, some ET energy that's in a human body that's having this experience to learn all these lessons. And coming from that point of view, it all becomes more of a game, and it's not that serious. So I go launch my first podcast episode. It's like, whatever. And that also takes time of doing it in a way that's kind of, you be as reverent and intentional as you can when you produce content or whatever your life's work is. I mean, you don't want to half-ass anything. You give it your all, but if it doesn't meet your expectations, it's like you learn to take it less serious, because you just know it's part of the game. It's just you playing out these different roles in the melodrama of this particular human incarnation, this particular human experience. And in identification with who and what I really am, that becomes possible. Because it's not the mind saying, well, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to make this much money, have this kind of wife, this type of house, 2.5 kids, you need a BMW, you need this, and then you're somebody. That's the Western paradigm, and it's a paradigm that is inherently going to lead to dissatisfaction, because you're working to get something for the person that isn't you. The wrong person is in charge, and it's the false person. It's preconceived ideas and frameworks that have been embedded into you by society, culture, parents, etc. Not to mention the underlying shame and everything that I just described from our early experiences that color who we think we are. And learning this, especially learning it early on, if you can really allow it to sink in, prevents contextualizing experiences that don't work out as you plan them to be as failures, but rather, cool, okay, next, move on. What direction am I going now? And when you're going in the right direction, you know it because you enjoy what you're doing, and it's easy. Just like I watch your relationship with Emily. I know you're with the right... I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
I know you're with the right woman for you because you're happy and she's happy. And if shit comes up, it's like you deal with it. It's done. And the same goes for me with my girlfriend Allison. It's just, I just know I'm going in the right direction. Not because it's easy in the sense that it never requires any attention or intention or dedicated time to set aside to, work on in this, in a work is even the wrong word. It's just, it requires being attentive to cultivate any kind of relationship with a person or your career or your art or anything. It requires attention. You can't just leave it alone. I leave this plant alone. That's not a plant anymore. It's sawdust, or whatever. So it requires attention, but that's how you know you're on course. And that's like in my own life now, I know I'm on course when I'm passionate about what I'm doing. I know that's my dharma. I know that if I'm living a life of service and I'm living a life of self-discovery and discovery of truth, and I commit to sharing that truth in the most honest, integrous, authentic way I possibly can, I'm fulfilled. And when I'm fulfilled, the resources that I need for my life are just there. Now, I want more resources because I'm expanding.
Yeah.
So I make more money now than I ever have in my life, and I'm like, oh, hell no.
And the expansion is going to require more resources.
Yeah, exactly. It's self-fulfilling in the expansion, but the expansion doesn't necessarily have to be material. It's just expansion of the way that I view my life and my experience. It's just expanding that open-mindedness, I mean, you and I, we know all about open-mindedness because in order to have a spiritual experience of life, you have to really be open to different ideas and open to the possibility of perceiving what's presenting itself in our current reality from every possible angle. That's true open-mindedness, is the non-duality, the non-judgment of like, this is a good experience. This was a good thing. That's a bad thing. That's a really tough way to live life. Where if you live in a position of neutrality, everything is sort of open to interpretation. So you imagine you have like kind of a globe in your hand, right? And from your perception, it's like, oh God, my life's falling apart. If you can just open your mind enough to turn and see the other side of that thing, it's like, oh no, this is perfect. Thank God I got fired.
Yeah.
And this is what hindsight gives us if we stop and take inventory of ourselves as we go through life and not just blindly keep pushing forward, but we really take time through meditation and other practices to reflect. We can see, aha, I see why that thing that I really wanted, that I thought was the answer, didn't manifest. It's because it didn't serve the highest good. It wasn't in alignment with the will of the intelligence that created the known universe, including me and everything that happens or doesn't happen. And so it's in that the self-healing, the self-trust starts to develop, because I'm learning how to trust something outside of myself that's unseen. And man, it takes a lot of trust to be able to trust that.
Absolutely.
It's hard to trust a person, a finite human being in our life. Try trusting the universe, man. It's like,
the
dude,
unknown.
trusting the unknown is our challenge.
Yeah,
is
that's
our
where
challenge.
I'm at right now.
And then we have to log, and I'll stop. You ask me shit that I'm so passionate about, so I just go on and on. I apologize.
Well, I wanted to actually start by going deep first, and then we're going to come up.
Well, that start talking about existential life complexities. That's deep, and that's the only thing I really care to talk about most of the time. And so anyway, so that's my current view of that. And hopefully you will talk to me next week or in a year, and I'll go, oh yeah, that was okay. The thing I said before, almost on the mark, but here's the way I'm seeing things now. And it's always veering toward more simplicity, toward more universal truth. There's no such thing as right or wrong, only thinking makes it so. So my job is to adjust my thinking to stay out of that duality, out of that judgment, including and especially in my own life and my own endeavors, and remove the idea of failure. And I would recommend removing the idea of doing something scary, because why preemptively call it scary? Just I'm committing to expanding.
It's been very hard for me to step out of a life that's not always being or constantly being weighed down by the feeling of fear, anxiety, nervousness, growing up with conflict and drama and chaos. I feel like I've really taken on a more survival state. And it's been a major practice trying to find my way out of that, because sometimes I don't even know. I might even be excited and happy and joyous, but I might be perceiving it as I'm afraid. Well, my heart is beating. It could just be out of love. It could just be out of, I'm excited to do this thing, but my interpretation, because I'm so used to the fear or what is being perceived as fear, that interpretation of the excitement has become a thought of, oh, I'm afraid. And then there's like a retracting or a shrinking, rather than what you're talking about, that expanding. And it's been a major daily practice, is the best way I could describe that.
Yeah.
Easier said than done for me. a lot of the time, and then sometimes I seem to be able to just kind of see it for what it is, and then I'm grounded. Like, it's taken me almost 30 minutes to get grounded with you because of all the ideas about being on whatever Insta Live or Facebook Live for my first podcast, and I could see my mind traveling over here and, you know, trying to listen and stay present with you. Plus I have a format I created, and I'm doing this thing, and it's new. I've never done it. It's a podcast. What is this? And the cameras are on, the lights are on. My girlfriend is here. My brother is here. And just being able to see it for what it is and surrender, like you're talking about, and just accept it as, this is just another moment in time, and this is what it's like right now. But I also have a feeling underneath that of, by continuing to show up, this nervousness or anxiety or so-called fear can, over time, which is the practice, be alleviated to where I can live a life that actually is, no matter what's going on, no matter who's here, no matter cameras, no cameras, to where I can just be. Like, that's a goal of mine. Haven't mastered that, but...
Well, it's a goal that you can have, dude, because in each level or increment of expansion, you're going to be guided to go one direction or the other, right? So in expansion, things are working. You're in flow. You're achieving success. There's opportunities coming in. In other words, doors are opening for you, and there's that type of expansion. And you go with that. And then what happens is you start to learn how to trust your gut and your intuition, and you start to derive some self-worth out of things going according to plan. And you set an intention. I want things to go this way, and I'm going to work really hard and be diligent and be committed and disciplined, and then they do. That's one of the ways that the fear gets alleviated, so that when you get to the next level of expansion, sure, you got a little butterfly here and there, but you're compounding that feeling of being successful. So when I first started my podcast, I was really nervous sitting down and just having a conversation with someone, because, as you said, if we were just chilling, I'd be fine. But because there's cameras and live streams and all this stuff, I'd get nervous. If you would have told me then you're going to go talk to a couple thousand people on stage and give like a keynote talk, I would think, oh, hell no. How am I ever going to do that? I can't even talk to one person. But in that expansion comes the building of muscle. It's like you get in shape, just like you go to the gym and you try to bench press 250 pounds. It's going to be rough the first time, but if depend on your makeup, of course. I'm just picking an arbitrary number. But after some time, you get up to 250 and you're like, what was the big deal? This is easy. And then you go do some other type of, you take a yoga class or something you thought that was going to be hard. And because you've achieved mastery in one area there within the confines of that framework, just physicality, then that other thing also becomes easy, even though it's new. Because you're still expanding into your area of genius and what you're really good at. So for me, my area of genius, and I'm sure many people would disagree, but when I feel in my most genius is doing what we're doing right now. So this is very easy after having been what I would guess would consider successful, because it's still fun and no one stopped me yet. Then the next level of expansion of going to speak on stage in London or something like that, like some of my big milestones, actually aren't really hard, because I've already worked through and built up the muscle of like, this is what I do, this is what I'm good at.
Putting in the repetitions already.
Yeah, exactly. The reps, doing reps, one more podcast, getting all the gear set up, all that thing. Speak at a little tiny place where there's 20 people, then the next one there's 150, next one there's 500, next one there's 2,000, etc. And you just kind of acclimate to the altitude of that expansion. But when you stay small and contracted, then everything you face is scary as shit. Because you've not built that muscle of expansion and walking into the unknown and trusting yourself and trusting your higher power and learning how to adapt to changes as you go along. And that's so much easier when you're living your life's mission, when you're doing the thing you're passionate about, because it's what fills your heart and serves your soul, rather than what other people tell you should be doing or what your intellect tells you makes the most sense logically. And I truly believe that every person on the planet does have one thing that they do best. That's their thing, in an area of performance, whatever that might be. It's like, and we have a tendency to have preconceived ideas about what that should be for other people. and what it should be for ourselves. An example of that, one of my greatest teachers is the woman that cleans the house here. And I've talked about her before on my podcast because she's like my spiritual teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Her name's Odelia, and I think she's from, is it El Salvador? I think she's from El Salvador, maybe Guatemala. I forget. She speaks hella Spanish, so she's from somewhere down there. But the point being, she's the happiest person I've ever met in my life. She's just love and light. She walks in the door and you just feel love. She is an enlightened master. I'm not even exaggerating. Like, I don't know what she's up to. One of these days maybe I should ask her. I'll interview her. Like, what is your secret? Like, do you pray a lot? Do you go to church? Do you meditate? What's the deal? But see, I'll superimpose my genius, my genius zone. Not that I'm a genius, but just, the thing I'm passionate about, my dharma, my path, my mission. I'll superimpose that on her and think, oh, poor lady, God, man, I feel so bad. She's got to come over here and vacuum the rugs and, wash the towels. Like, oh, God, I'll start feeling sorry for her. And then I look at her like, she doesn't give a shit. She probably feels sorry for me. I'm stressing out, trying to set up my tripods. Like, I'm freaking out because my recording didn't come out right or whatever. And she's like, oh, poor guy, man. I wish, I'm glad I don't have his gig. You know what I mean? But that's the only reason for that is because, I'm not saying she doesn't have other talents or she might have another mission or whatever, but when she's here doing that thing, she's in love with it because she's in love with herself in the most positive sense. In other words, she's learned how to access satisfaction and love within herself. I'm sure there's things she loves to do. Maybe she plays tennis or who knows what, and she loves that, but she doesn't only love that. And then when she comes and does her thing here, to make a few bucks, she's not hating it. No, she's happy probably all the time because she's someone that's learned the game of being happy. So her happiness is not dependent on circumstances. It's not dependent on what she's doing and if things go her way or not her way. And that's something that we each have the ability to control. As I said earlier, it's the way that we're thinking about something, the way that we perceive something. There's situations in which we experience zero control, like the situation we find ourselves in culturally and politically now with this coronavirus thing and all this. Like, I go to the grocery store today and I'm like, cool, I'm gonna roll up and get some groceries. No, I'm not. There's a line going down the block because only one person at a time can go in. So I got a little annoyed. I'm not enlightened yet. I was like, fuck groceries, whatever. Actually, I was like, fuck the store. Meanwhile, every grocery store is like that at the moment.
Got to get that big freezer.
Yeah, but the point is in that moment, I know that I have a choice. I have a choice to view this as they're out to get me. Life is so hard. It never works out. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? It's like, no, I have no control over that, but I do have control over the way that I perceive it. The way that I perceive it is everything. And building that muscle allows me to go into situations even when things don't go my way, or I'm not doing the thing that's my thing, but I've built the muscle of making everything I do my thing. Because there's always going to be shit you don't like to do. I don't like to send all my 1099s. I email them to my CPAs like, oh, no, you got to scan them, or mail them all to me. I'm like, I don't want to sit here and find all those pieces of paper and fill out the envelope. Well, guess what? No one else can do it. So I got to find the love in that minutia and that grunt work. And the only way to do that is changing my perception of it and knowing that it's going toward the greater good of what my true mission is. It's just a little bit of the side work or admin that goes to support the greater mission. As long as I'm on the greater mission, then the little periphery stuff doesn't matter and everything becomes less scary. I keep expanding into bigger and bigger possibilities and it gets less scary the bigger it gets. And it becomes reverse exponential curve where the bigger I expand, the less scary it is instead of the other way around.
Can you talk to me about a question that I asked you on our last get-together and speak to the story of David Bowie? So it's a little bit of the, I want a combination here. So it's like the starting of your podcast, the ready, aim, fire, and then also the David Bowie and doing what you truly care about or what you're passionate about and sharing that level of curiosity and also how you find your guests that you're going to interview and the questions you ask. So it's a little bit of a mixture there.
Yeah.
But the Ready, Aim, Fire with the David Bowie,
Yeah.
I really would love to dive into that.
Yeah. When someone's afraid to do something, which is usually when they're walking into the void, into the unknown, and they're starting to do something they've never done before. Of course, you have fear because you're guessing what the steps are, what the strategy is that's going to take you from point A to point B, but you don't really know. So you start to build those steps. But because what you're doing is scary, you convolute the steps and make way more steps than that are necessary, and also put the last steps first and the first steps last in a subconscious way to sabotage that endeavor and to keep yourself from having to take the final plunge, the scary one, right? Mm-hmm. So for you, launching the first podcast episode, same thing it was
being here
me.
Today.
Yeah.
Just showing up.
For me, with my other business school of style, having the first class, this is when I really learned that principle from our friend Hector, is that idea that I have to understand every single step of the process of starting the thing. Then once I have everything figured out, then I'm going to start, right? Which makes sense to the logical mind because you think, well, yeah, you have to have, if there's 10 steps to do the thing, then you got to have all those 10 steps laid out and done. Then step 11 is the thing is happening, right? Mm-hmm. But because of human nature and the human nature we've just been describing and the ways in which we can delude ourselves and be blocked by all of this subconscious shame and the fear of failure and all of that stuff, what many of us have the tendency to do is to overcomplicate and keep filling up that list of things that need to get done before we execute. And we get paralyzed by the process of preparation. And we perfectionize the whole process so that we think every little nuance of it has to just be perfectly in place. Otherwise, when the thing happens, it's not going to work. And that is the ready, aim, fire, right? So you get ready, you pull the gun up, it's cocked, you aim, everything's all set, you're right on the target, and then boom, you pull the trigger, which to the logical mind makes perfect sense. If you're an entrepreneur and someone that wants to carve your own path in life, that's a really bad strategy because you will never be fully aimed, you will never be fully ready, and therefore you are likely to never fire. So the concept there is fire, aim, ready. So, you pull up the gun and you just go, and then you figure the rest out. You go chase the target. Did I hit anything? All right, I'm closer. Do it again, and it's this idea that, we need to understand, we need to say we want to cliff jump, right? We want to jump off this cliff and we have a parachute. So we're going to go study the inner workings of parachutes for the next 10 years when all we really want to do is just jump off that cliff because it's fun as hell, or we want to get to the bottom, right? So we need to understand the basic fundamentals of how the parachute operates. But if you have someone strapping on your back and they say, see that little string right there and there's that knob on the end, when you get about this far down, you pull that and you're going to just trust that parachute opens. That's the method of accomplishment. That's the method of execution. Jump, then pull the parachute out once you're there. You don't pull the parachute when you're still up on the cliff. You don't wait till you get to the bottom and then pull it because you've got no arm left. So it's this idea of it's better to launch whatever you're doing in a sloppy way that's going to stumble and maybe, have a few broken parts along the way than it is to wait forever and never actually do it.
So the perfect moment.
Fire, aim, ready. It's like
perfectly.
Just do it and then figure out the details later. The reason this works is because once there's inertia and something has started, and and your subconscious mind knows that now this thing, whatever this thing is happening, it instigates you to start putting those pieces together and fixing whatever it is about it that's not working. Whereas that paralysis of analysis, of thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it and wanting it to be perfect and perfect and perfect is all born out of fear. And anytime you're operating from fear, you're operating from weakness or fear of failure and a sense of doubt, self-doubt.
Limitation.
Yeah, it's all limited thinking, which is like, I'm doing this thing, I have faith, it's going to work out, boom, pull the trigger, let's go. Blow the bridge behind you, burn the boats behind you, like I'm doing this. And most entrepreneurs, it's really interesting, and I'll get to the David Bowie part, based on a study that I read some time ago, most entrepreneurs that are really, I mean, they're really successful ones, you know, the top 10 in the world, almost all of them dropped out of college or didn't go to college. They're kind of self-taught, self-learned, are intelligent, but are by no means the highest IQ people in the world. In fact, the top 10 highest IQ humans in the world work for other people. And that's true almost any given time.
Wow.
In other words, the more intellectual prowess you have, the more likely it is that you're going to get caught up in calculating the risks of the endeavor which you desire to embark on. So the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to get caught in the analysis and never actually execute. Or your risk aversion is so low that you would rather go work at a job that you hate, that's unfulfilling, even though you're smart enough to go do your own thing. You're probably smarter than your boss, but your boss is just dumb enough to go for it and start a company.
To take the risk.
Yeah. And it's the different kind of intelligence. It's the intelligence to know, it doesn't matter if this thing doesn't work like I think it is, I'll just do something else. That's the serial entrepreneur. Those are the cavaliers, the mavericks, the people that we look up to in society, more so than we do typically the intellectually superior people that hide within the shadows because they over-analyze the risks of any endeavor. And so I want to be part of the class that just says, I'm going to do it sloppy, but I'm going to do it. If it doesn't work, then it wasn't my thing. I'm trying to do something I'm not good at. I'm not trying to be a concert pianist because I'm probably not that good at that, you know? So I might try to do it, and if it doesn't work, it's like, okay, well, there goes a couple years trying that. Next, what's next? Let's do the thing I'm good at.
That's it. That's part 1 of 2. Thank you for tuning in and listening to episode number 1 of the Vision Hunters podcast. Be sure to check out part 2, episode number 2. Take care now.